like to call to order the Thursday, June 25th, 2026 special meeting of the Downtown Parking Committee. Staff, can we have a roll call?
Committee Member Cohen.
Here.
Committee Member Evers.
Here.
Committee Member Labrie.
Here.
Vice Chair Stahl.
Here.
Chair Newkirk.
Here.
Committee Members McRae and Pratt are absent. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Staff, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the agenda today.
All right, we'll go to general public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the committee for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the committee that is not scheduled for public discussion on this agenda. Staff, do we have any general public comment?
We have no speakers.
All right, we'll move on to announcements. Staff, are there any announcements?
I just want to announcement this morning, Chair Newkirk. I wanted to let the committee know that our fearless leader, Anthony Valdez, who's our Deputy City Administrator, is going to be leaving the city at the end of July to return to his home in the Bay Area. We've enjoyed working with Anthony over these past several months, and certainly his leadership will be missed in the office, but we wish him well.
All right, thank you for that. And I'll note that we have Committee Member Pratt now in attendance. With that, we will go to consent item number 1, which is approval of the meeting minutes for May 14th, 2026. Do we have any public comment on that item?
We have no speakers.
All right, do we have a motion from the committee?
Mr. Chair, I would move we accept the minutes as submitted.
I do and approve.
And approve.
All right, we have a first. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a first and a second. Do we have any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? And any abstentions? All right. All right, we are now on to the administrative items. Item number 2, the draft State Street Master Plan. Staff.
Thank you, Chair Newkirk and committee members. So this morning, we are very pleased to have Tess Harris and our consulting team with Stefanos Palazoidis and Miguel Nunez from Fair and Peers, who worked on some of the traffic analysis, here with us today to discuss the State Street Master Plan in greater depth with this committee. So at our last meeting, we queued up some questions from this committee that we will be addressing today and the consultants will be addressing today. And you'll have a chance, obviously, to ask questions and really get into it. So with that, I am going to decamp to the other side of the room, and Tess Harris is going to come up here.
All right, good morning, committee members. It's nice to be before you again this morning. My name is Tess Harris. I'm the State Street Master Planner, and just really looking forward to the conversation that we'll have today with the committee. We have a presentation that we're going to try to go through it relatively quickly as we can. There's a lot of material in it, so bear with us, but we'll leave plenty of time for questions and comments, and then you'll see kind of sprinkled through the presentation are some of the questions that I had received from one of your previous Downtown Parking Committee meetings. So to start out, I really wanted to start on what the challenges are related to the master plan, why we're really doing this project in the first place. And these are the 4 really main challenges that we've seen over the last 5 or so years as we've been working through this project, and challenges that we've kept at the forefront of our minds when thinking about the design and the action plan for the State Street Master Plan. So things like mobility conflicts, where there's tension between the various types of modes that exist on the street. Activation gaps, and that particularly is seen between the 700 and 900 blocks, Ortega to Carrillo Street. It's been interesting in the last couple years. There have been some big shifts, especially on the 900 block, and the 700 block has also had really positive sales tax. They've seen quite an increase in sales tax over the last 5 years as well, but it still feels like a different space because of the retail hours and the lack of evening activity in those 3 blocks. Retail shifts around Nordstrom and Macy's. There are some exciting developments related to that that'll be coming forward as well. But, recognizing that there have been some massive changes in retail overall in the downtown core. Aging infrastructure, which I think actually is probably one of the most important pieces here, and I'll talk about it at the end of the presentation as well. But when we have rain events, you notice it whether you realize it or not with flooding downtown. And we have aging infrastructure not only from our stormwater system, but also from our utility infrastructure. Many of the utility lines in the street are 50 plus years old and haven't been placed in such a way where they can be consolidated and maintained in one particular area. So that's something we're looking to address as well in the plan. And while there are lots of challenges with the project overall, there are also a lot of things that I think are worth recognizing, that we should be celebrating, that we have over 1 million visitors that visit State Street alone just in the last year, that we've had $200 million in annual contributions from the nonprofit arts and culture sector in our community. We have over $2 billion in tourism spending. The number on the slide is from 2022. It's gone up to $2.3 billion as of 2025. And then a reduction in the collisions that we've seen downtown. And Stefanos will talk a little bit more about the history in one of his slides, but I wanted to just sort of set the stage. In the master plan, there is a more in-depth history chapter that talks about history well before 1925. So I do want to make clear there is a lot of history that exists well before this timeline that you see on the slide. But since 1925, there has been this interesting sense, as many of you know, for thinking about how downtown operates. In 1925, over 80% of the buildings were damaged or destroyed and rebuilt, and that's why we have the Spanish colonial revival style that you see today that's different from what existed previously, like more of a Victorian feel. And then in the 60s, the city's general plan was adopted, and in that, the first general plan, there's a discussion specifically around having sort of a pedestrian priority or a corridor on State Street that's really geared towards pedestrians, recognizing it as a commercial core. Also in the late 60s is when we really talked about the Plaza streetscape, and the 6 blocks from Ortega to Victoria Street were redesigned in many ways and changed from a 4-lane street to a 2-lane street, and parking on the street to no parking on the street. It's also when many of the parking strategy that your committee oversees started to be developed, and the Paseo network came from the parking infrastructure itself, which I think is sort of fascinating. As well, and that whole piece started back then, and then the redevelopment agency expanded the plaza, and between 1972 and 2012 a lot of work was done in terms of building parking garages and parking lots and Paseo networks, and doing additional landscaping and maintenance work on the street. In the 80s, that 6-block corridor was expanded into 8 blocks, so we added the 2 blocks south of Ortega to Haley Street. But really, since then, we haven't done a whole lot of development downtown, meaning we haven't done a lot of public space infrastructure or really thought about what downtown should look like or feel like. And I think it's important to recognize that. It's also important to recognize that this is not the first time we are talking about downtown and what it should look like, and this is not the first time that downtown has evolved. And there is this interesting history that exists in our community for a pedestrian feeling or a pedestrian environment in the downtown area. So the plan will, as Stefanos will walk through in more detail, the plan really divides the project into 3 different districts, and it sort of naturally happened anyway. So this is really just calling names to what you see out there today in many ways, but the plan would start to better differentiate the zones, meaning that you have the arts district up in the sort of northern portion of the street. And that is going to look different from the civic and commercial district in the middle 3 blocks, and or the entertainment district on the bottom 3 blocks, with the emphasis really, or highest investment that staff believes should be geared towards the civic and commercial area. There's a lot of potential for redevelopment in that area in particular, and a lot of just sort of amazing civic buildings that exist in that space, and it's also the area that seems like it's sort of the most underutilized at this point. I wanted to just briefly touch on the engagement that's happened in the community for this project. These numbers have increased since I've made this slide, but you know, we've had surveys for the community. We did design workshops, community open houses. We went out to various engagement activities in the community, trying to meet people where they were and talk about what they wanted to see in their downtown. And that was important because these were the takeaways that we got out of it. And really enhancing the walkability in the public realm, making sure that the downtown economy is strong. There was a recognition of concern about vacancies and wanting to have strong support for a diverse mix of uses. We had a really strong, over 95% of people had emphasized the tree canopy on State Street and wanting to maintain and enhance that aspect of the street. And then other things as well, celebrating the sort of what makes State Street, or what makes it different than other downtown communities. And so these are elements that we've taken with us throughout the project. And from that, we came into this vision for the master plan. The vision is that it's a flexible pedestrian-first State Street rooted in Santa Barbara's history and adaptable to its future. And these 10 goals were identified as part of the State Street Advisory Committee's role for the master plan. So throughout, we've tried to really sort of hit on each of these goals in different ways. I won't read through them all, but there's elements of sustainability, there's elements of economic development, of housing and redevelopment, all within these goals. And then we're going to get into the design, and so I'll have Stefanos come on up and start to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done here.
Would you help me with the slides?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this morning. It's remarkable that it is 8 o'clock and there are even people in the audience. It's admirable. In the few images we're going to present to you this morning, we're just going to try to describe the reasons for the flex scheme and also the particular configurations and solutions that can be expected to come out of a rethinking of the right-of-way design of State Street for the years to come. It is very important in starting any effort of this kind to look at the past and to think about what the past has brought upon us. Tess spoke some about the 100 or more year spread in the way in which this street has been considered and designed over this period of time. And I think I just want to stress one very important thing, which is that change is inevitable. I mean, it happens for many reasons. Technological changes. Changes in economies, preferences of people, acts of God, all kinds of things happen in life that make this kind of reconsideration or thinking of design almost inevitable. And the other one, and the second thing is that there seems to be a kind of trend in the way these changes have happened in Santa Barbara on State Street, and they have to do a lot with the fact that as more and more cars were being introduced into the system away from transit, the earlier times of transit, the changes that were made reflected the idea that there ought to be less parking on the street, more presence of public space and landscape, and that resulted in a whole system or process and system of providing parking in a different manner, indirectly and concentrated on the sides of the street. That I think is probably the most important lesson of the last 50 to 70 years, that the parking arrangements in traditional Main Street patterns, which is basically diagonal or parallel parking on streets on State Street, the traditional meaning for the whole country, just about, were transferred into another system, which has been pretty popular in Southern California. I can think of Pasadena, Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, all kinds of places in the center of our region, in the urban center of our region, which actually have adopted the system and have prospered over a long period of time. Next. And so one of the most important issues then to acknowledge, starting first of all, is that we're dealing with a very, very unusual Main Street, because most Main Streets in the United States are essentially 3 blocks long, about 1,200 to 1,500 square feet is actually that is the common pattern. And so here we have a very interesting agglomeration of different kinds of downtown elements over time, beginning with a pier, but we call this the waterfront zone, the Funk Zone, which is a recent development, which nonetheless has stressed the system a little bit because it's more conventional, allows people to get to businesses by car and park adjacent to their destination and so on. And then an entertainment, what we identify as an entertainment, civic, commercial, and arts districts that are just, connected end to end, and which are essentially, not 10 blocks long, approximately, or so. There've been pressures to enlarge the system some, but I mean they're about 10 blocks long. These three areas together, and which present, I think, challenges of a very interesting kind that the flex scheme attempts to resolve. So one important thing to understand about the central portion that you see illustrated here of the downtown is that there is a very interesting balance between square feet, total square feet, and total parking spaces. I think you have to keep in mind that the average number of cars per square feet in a workable downtown in Southern California, and I'm now averaging out a dozen or so downtowns, is about two per thousand, and this is very important because 2 per thousand means that we're dealing with a downtown situation where people park and walk, because the typical strip parking ratios, as you know, are between 3 and 10. Depending where you are and how you are. So when one comes as an outsider and looks at this from an analytical point of view and sees 800,000 square feet of space divided, as you can see in the numbers in these 3 sub-districts, and 4,000 cars, the first slide that goes on is walkable district. And so that's an important, really a fundamental point of departure. Next. The other important thing to recognize, and I'm not going to spend time talking about this in great detail, is that not only does the slide go on and one begins to think, well, this is a certain kind of place. Then you look at the ingredients of this place, the way the land uses, the great architectural monuments. I mean, this is one of the greatest built downtown in the country. Its common buildings and its civic buildings are really remarkable. The parking distribution I spoke about, the service access mostly from the back, bicycle network already active in the place, public transit active in the place, and of course in a special kind of mode, and then open space and streetscape also firmly established. So the basic ingredients are all here, maybe in different levels of strength or quality, but they're all here. So this is a walkable district. It's been run over a long period of time. It has certain characteristics. It is perfectly endowed. It just needs to be rebalanced and rethought. We were not part, as you know, we came into this process relatively in the end. There was a very robust public process preceding us, but we insisted that we come and confirm, by meeting with various groups of people, that confirm what the key issues were. And I think I will just repeat this because it's too important to not repeat it, Tess, that there are mobility questions, retail questions of retail quality and levels of performance. There is infrastructure questions in the areas of paving and drainage, and there is landscape. There are landscape issues because what's in place is old enough, I think, to need to be refreshed and to be rethought anyway. So these are fundamental questions that really bear upon how one designs this place in the future. Next. And then the idea of a flexible design is one that acknowledges, I think, that there are two sides to this argument. There's the side that there are pedestrian and bicycle-based activities that are very prominent and very very unique here from a volume perspective. Because of the nature of the city, because of the history of the city, because of the climate of the city, because of the location of the city, all of those things together, because of the form of the city. And then on the other side, there are the questions of retail performance and the stress in that performance induced by COVID and pre-COVID by the whole situation with retail that is based on internet-based commerce and so on. So it was a judgment that the way this needs to be approached in the next period of time is not as an open or closed question, but as a flex question that allows, in a street type that can be transformed over time as necessary, allows both the maximum number of modes to operate on the one hand, and the greatest liberty in understanding how those operate over time, because as you know, change is going to be accelerating, and we don't know what that change is, and we have to remain open. And open or closed is not flexible enough, I think, to accommodate what is coming. Why flexible design? Because if it allows the needs of the current modes to be accommodated relative to the uses and needs of people in place around this 9-10 blocks. If it allows that to happen at various times of the day in different ways, then I think it virtually guarantees that over time, the system remains vital and prosperous. There are a few key design issues that make the scheme that we propose possible. One of them, most important, is that the street is 80 feet wide. If the street was 100 feet wide, we would be proposing something completely different. But at 80 feet wide, and the need for a 20-foot fixed center in the street for emergency access over time, and the need to put this relatively, if not entirely in the middle of the street, means that we start with a division of 30, 30, and 20, as you can see here. And then the possibility emerges within the system, particularly if the parking is limited to the garages, as it always has. The possibility exists of enlarging the pedestrian sidewalks to 30 feet and allowing activities to, allowing a zoning of this 30 feet to allow for outdoor eating and other entertainment uses and walking as well. And then in the middle of the block, we can have bicycles and transit during the day. Beach to and through transit all the way up to Victoria or Sola even. And in the evening, with the bollards that we would place in the street down, one would allow both cars and bicycles to mix on the street. In the evening, meaning probably the way we had started, we're showing 10 to 10 operations, 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. At night, I should say, not evening, night and early morning. One would allow then the circulation to exist at a time where the volumes of both pedestrians and vehicles are the least. They're exceptionally low. And so that is the mode of evening operation, service and drop-off in the evening. All speeds are slow, proper lighting. There are many other issues, of course, that have to be imagined to operate such a system profitably and safely. And there is also a design question, which is that because we have so many blocks of activity and they're divided into three, it might be possible that the middle three blocks might develop their own landscape and their own paving and their own to the degree possible, their own character, their own visual and architectural character, and be used in an exceptionally different way than the rest. So there is also the acknowledgement in the scheme that 9 blocks is too long. It's too long a street to have exactly the same character. And because the middle of State Street has also the greatest number of monuments, the most intense buildings, most of the greatest civic activities and so on, that also could be revitalized over time to provide a more powerful kind of destination in any case. So this is really the slide that shows the zoning. I think it is important to recognize that there are codes that prescribe some of the dimensions of these your codes that design municipal codes, the dimensions of the zones. But we have a frontage zone for extension of dining facilities out there, then the sidewalk. Then we have a transition area of where we can accommodate, seating, art, all kinds of other things that exist within a framework like that. And then we have 3 extra feet for the possibility of emergency vehicles to actually lean or park on or move onto to allow passage at night if necessary. We have to have a total of 26 feet for operations for emergency vehicles. 20 for movement, and then, of course, symmetrically on the other side, the same kind of accommodation. Next. And so, some of your questions, we've received your questions, and I think that this is a very, very important subject, the bollard placement. If you go back, actually, I think for a second, in our drawings we showed a concave method, and do we have the slide coming? Okay, so because we have a slide showing this particular image illustrates the way in which these bollards work. Some of them can be fixed, others can be, depending on where they're located, others can be movable, they're very flexible, they can be brought up and down very simply, remotely. Different people can have different access to them and so on. I mean, that's a clear issue that is resolved in many other places in the country and abroad. But the question that was asked was, why is the placement convex? And the answer is that we are, like in many other aspects of the design of this project, we're actually not only thinking about those things ourselves further, but we're also taking evidence from you and your thoughts about how something like this is done. The convex character had to do with protecting if you go to is it coming up? Yeah. If you go to the next slide, I think...
Give me one moment. I'm going to find the slide.
It would be helpful, I think, to answer that question, it seems to me, if we could. Thank you, Tess. I think we're showing here, you can see the pedestrian crossing, and we're showing the continuous sidewalk passage, east to west, or north to south, however you do this in Santa Barbara, you're in between the two, being placed behind the bollards being placed behind this crossing in order to protect the pedestrians from bicycles that may be coming down at some speed. This brought up the question, well, now what you're doing here is you're making a little eddy that the cars can take a right and drop people off there. And one of the things that we're now thinking about is which of the two is more advantageous to pedestrians. And this is, Miguel can speak to this in question and answer if you wish further, but there are pros and cons about the exact location and the exact shape of this placement.
And committee members, I just wanted to highlight, I think this is a slightly, there was an additional slide that wasn't, is not in this presentation. That was an accident on my part. But you should have it printed out, and so that shows you the different bollard placement. Yeah, this slide here that Stefanos was just talking about, he was talking about this slide as well as the slide that you have printed. It just shows a slightly different configuration for the retractable bollards that goes up in front of the crosswalk area, and so it's something that the team is we're exploring both options. There's pros and cons. We can talk about it more, and Miguel certainly can answer some questions on that as well.
Have you seen it in your printed? Yeah. Okay. So this line just moves out close to the street. This is necessarily, I think we have to look at this from a slightly generalized perspective. I mean, eventually this is going to have to be designed street to street. Streets have different lane configurations. Some of them have slightly different widths. So this is a generic view of how one would bring the sidewalk space out, the bulb outs out, in order to minimize pedestrian crossing times, and also make perhaps some kind of a monument, at least in the beginnings and the ends of the three block portions, in order to mark them and also to make the crossing in general more advantageous to pedestrians. There is also the issue of all the side streets for at least 50 to 75 feet on all four of them in every intersection being used for deliveries, for pickup of Uber and Lyft and so on, for activities that actually support the operations of State Street. All right, so back to our regular sequence. All right, and then so we spoke about this, and this is just a reminder of one very important issue, which is that these are the three block areas of 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and 1,000 to 1,200 that illustrate the beginning specific ideas about how the sections I showed you is translated into plan, and they also illustrate the degree to which planting in the two end sections is actually maintained and enhanced, clarified, revitalized, and so on, and generally enhanced, and how in the middle we'll be hoping to put a new alley of sycamore trees and new paving. In other words, change the architecture of the place to make it more unique and unusual. Perhaps introduce monuments of various kinds in art or otherwise, and invite people to have greater public engagement in those areas as well. And a detailed version shows that 20 feet in the middle. There's a little. There are crosswalks. There's at least 2 per block now introduced, and along with the shorter crossings at the ends of the blocks. And there are places on each block for the electric vehicle transit to stop as well. So these are beginning ideas. I mean, these are all all intentions about how these things ought to happen, and of course there is an enormous amount of work to be done in realizing this in design when the time comes to the particulars. And next, the right of way can be beautifully detailed. I think much of this, I just came back from a trip to Spain, and I just marveled at the way in which that whole country is paved in both cities and villages to the degree that's quite incredible. And so what we're trying to accomplish in public space is to begin to see to it that where we have some significant paving in place, which is the 4 to 6 block and the 10 to 12 block, where we have we want to retain the brick in place. We could enhance it in certain ways, but it is all there. And in other places, in the central 3 blocks, we would want to maybe introduce stone, if we could, or concrete, however that ends up being played out. And the street itself, I think, needs to be designed with patterns of paving and with compositional manners of combining these that encourages bicyclists to slow down and prioritizes the crossing of pedestrians whenever pedestrians cross. So this has to look more like a plaza than a street, but it has to also function as a street for obvious reasons. The reasons are both the emergency vehicles, and in the summer, a flow of over 1,000 bicycles a day, which is an unusually very high number. I'm actually not aware where there's such a high number like that anywhere else in the country, Miguel. I'm not aware. This is a truly unusual number. And then the public space is also enhanced by canopies of trees, by low planting, by special different kinds of housing, sitting, and barrier setting, and many other dimensions of public space design that would give this particular character and particular quality. And so when you put all of these things together, I think we can now begin to vision this as a place. And one of the very unusual and actually rather disturbing aspects of the last 5 or 6 years is that the closing down of the street and its conversion to a more pedestrian-dominated mode did not change its form. So neither did it look better, nor did it perform better from the point of view particularly of how bicycles, fast electric bicycles, dominated that space. So if you put all of these things together we spoke about, this is how this portion of the street would I think we're in the middle portion here. How would that change over time? There would be a very much of a central 20 feet with rolling curbs on the side. Next to it is a 3-foot zone you can see, which is a transitional zone for parking, which is combined visually with a 4-foot zone that shows sometimes art, sometimes bancos, sometimes bicycle parking, and so on. And then comes the 30-foot sidewalk. Here we have the beginnings, of the spring moment in the life of sycamores that begin to, after probably 10 years, begin to join and to create this marvelous canopy. And we have Southern European examples, particularly where these sycamore trees after 30, 40, 50, 100 years are really monumental, and they begin to make this place look extraordinary in its presence. Next, and then we have the lower portion. Is that the upper portion? The upper portion. Sorry, yes, the upper portion, which has a similar kind of configuration right now in the way it's being used, and which is transformed in this particular way with a much more diverse streetscape, but with a similar way of using the ingredients of the plan as I described them to you, but especially designed for the place. And that example would be, of course, the continuation of the brick sidewalk, which gives the place an entirely different character. And you know, although the eating arrangements at this point look like are represented rather modestly. This could be a much more. This could over time be a by far more active and by far more lively place with many more people eating outdoors and so on. And then the same kind of arrangement, the same kind of arrangement, the same kind of zoning for the center of the street can then be also used for special events by making sure the infrastructure is in place. For instance, to see the farmers market be a continuous and strong presence there. You can also see that the bollards are introduced here to show how the system is protected on both ends. Next. And then we chose also to show you what a 30-foot sidewalk looks like. It sounds like an enormous dimension. It really is not an enormous dimension. Currently, the place in most places along State Street, this 20 or so feet that are in place, 18, whatever that sidewalk is sliced and used in a very diverse and very confusing way, actually. But when you look at what this could look like as a 30-foot sidewalk with the existing set of trees in the middle of it, essentially, that would be a very, very unusual streetscape and a very unusual place. And I think a very distinctive and good one. So, some more of your questions. The issue of surrounding streets. We have no jurisdiction on the subject of the streets being changed, or no voice, actually, because we are actually working strictly on State Street. But it is very clear that there's an orientation question here of rather remarkable kind. The one-way streets are forcing people up and down into the system. It's very difficult to return to where you are to come across. And also the one-way system, speedy as it is driving people out as opposed to in. And also it needs to be better. It needs to be better designed from the perspective of providing direction as to access to parking. And so the two-way system would be slower, would be more directional, I think is the right word, and also it would provide a sense of certainty about how one accesses State Street coming into the city or going out of it. We are suggesting that this be studied. Essentially, we're not. As I said, we have no say in how this would be done or whether it should be done at all. But I think from the experience of having worked elsewhere, I think this is an important idea that needs to be addressed and addressed seriously in the future. And now a few words on a few. I won't speak very much about this. This is just Miguel's slide on the peak use of State Street in its. I believe it was in. I'm trying to remember. This is, I think, at the 10 to 12 portion, right at the top of at 6. Are they mixed? Okay, but nonetheless, I mean, it shows the peak movement at 1,000 or so cars each way. I mean, bikes each way, and it's a reminder that to actually propose a scheme like this, one has to have, in places, in important places, on important issues, has to have the data that supports such a move. The other one is the question of infrastructure that you spoke about at some length, Tess. And I think there is an issue here. There's an issue of flooding on the street, and I think if one was going to change so much about the configuration of State Street, one would have to, I think, address the question of the utilities and the question of flooding. This drawing shows on the bottom an exaggerated vertical dimension. At the top, the actual dimension of the depth is about, I think, 4.5 feet, something like that. And the fundamental reason why we are not talking about either elevated intersections or a plaza project is because the camber of the street has to be reversed from concave to convex in order to hold the water and to actually let the water percolate in the ground and run across intersections in the process of resolving the control of the flow and of the storage of the water. How will vehicle stopping work when the street is open to private vehicles? Pulling up on the curb will not be allowed. There's pull-outs as I spoke about before, and it's going to be very consistent the way things were before. There was no stopping before anywhere in the previous condition. And I also spoke about the fact we have the cross-street questions, which I think are fundamental to what happens in the future. We spoke about this one. Flat and flexible, I just addressed it. I think I didn't speak about that issue, and I think if you go back, it's okay, it's here. If the street was also flat, assuming that we didn't have the water issues to deal with, if the street was flat, we would have to have a gazillion bollards up and down on a flat project to keep people from cars to going across. It's that kind of, it'll be bollard city. This would be flex bollards, but in the hundreds probably. I think we spoke about this one, and then it is terribly important for you to also recognize, although we did not have a retail consultancy that dealt specifically with this kinds of questions. We've worked in enough cities where the issue of how one guarantees the proper working of a retail environment is very much at the forefront of any effort to fix a street of this kind. So we have access and signage questions, parking and surface structure, parking surface and structure, structure behind surface in the cross streets, streetscape and landscape issues, how one fixes fixed zones for retail dining entertainment, the need for public programming, the exceptional need for housing the downtown, quality of storefronts being regulated, transit, electric in this case, but transit nonetheless to enlarge the number of people moving north-south, lighting, appropriate lighting both on the street, on the edges against the storefronts, and safety, a universal need for safety across the board. All these issues are really critical to the way in which a street like this is designed and it is run. I think that there is this sheet, which I think I can barely see from here, which nonetheless, maybe you want to read that for me, Tess.
Yes, I can
I
read
think this is not a defensive argument. It is actually an enabling argument, I think, and it basically says that we, as a consultant team, don't feel that opening up the street to traffic is going to save the show from a retail point of view. I think the retail issues are by far more complex. The flex scheme allows that to be a possible option in the future, if necessary. But I think there's a lot more about the retail operations of the street that are both city-based or city responsibility, and also are dependent on the way in which retailers actually and building owners need to act into the future, and it's there's almost a level of I don't know, a kind of conference that has to come together to work these things out, and if you would please read those for me,
Yes.
I'd appreciate it.
Encourage a wide selection of businesses, brands, and price points that appeal to the community and visitors. Consider block-by-block management to better respond to changing market trends and community preferences. Implement store, civic, and brand wayfinding system along State Street. Support and expand the Business Improvement District's resources. Execute a robust performance-based parking management approach that considers pricing and peak hours to encourage turnover and availability. Convert Anacapa Street, Chapala Street, Gutierrez Street, and Haley Street into two-way thoroughfares. Repurpose underutilized commercial properties for housing, community uses, and commercial space. Explore public programming and events that encourage diverse activities and celebrations. Initiate a specific plan to enable infill housing. And as the plan is being executed, the city should propose a schedule for reducing the time necessary to issue retail licenses on State Street.
So you can see that the technical issue of how one deals with a street is just a very small part of a very big challenge, and it should be seen as that, I think.
Great. So I'm going to talk through the implementation section of the plan now. And I'm just going to stay pretty high level, but I have the plan with me. I'm happy to get into more detail if you have questions. We've listed in the draft plan 3 different phases, really trying to identify how we could divide up some of the projects in the plan. There's a number of things that could be done right away, like the advancement of detailed engineering and design level or construction level documents. And we are currently in the process of looking at grant opportunities to get full funding for that. Looking at other opportunities for business grants or loan programs, expedited permitting, wayfinding, Paseo lighting. In phase 2, we would really emphasize the actual construction of the different districts and be starting at a location likely at the top and moving down, but dependent on funding, would need to decide where that the project really starts. And then in the 3rd phase, it would finalize the construction of one of the 3 districts and then really work on some of the other programming elements. I think the other piece I want to highlight here that I'll talk about in one of the next slides is the action plan, or the plan in Chapter 6, the implementation section, walks through a number of different action items that could occur. So the design is one, but there are many others. It's a few pages long. Things like retail strategy, understanding what a small business loan or grant program could look like from the city, and many others as well. How we pay for the project, I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this, except to say that this is a question that has come up since the beginning of this project. And yes, it is an expensive project. There is no city project that is not expensive in some way. And I can list off many that we've done and we've been successful in doing and have done through a variety of funding sources. This slide just emphasizes some of the funding sources and at a just sort of high level estimate of what we could potentially receive from different sources. It's not just the city capital budget, which is what I often hear the concern of, is how, our tax is going to increase because of this project. No, not necessarily. We are looking at bond, using sort of similar to how the police station operated, a lease revenue or general obligation bond. We have submitted for an active transportation program grant through the state for the engineering and detailed design work, and I would expect that we would submit again for the actual construction phase, and that could fund a majority of the project. It has funded things, many things for the city in the past, and as an example, the Cliff Drive project, it was funded over, I believe, $25 million. So it is a large funding source. The state has about $600 million that they'll be giving out in this cycle. There's a stormwater in lieu fund opportunity, and there's funding sources through Measure B and other elements in the stormwater program. And then there's other pieces here as well. The other thing, when the funding question comes up, that I do think is important to emphasize is, again, around the stormwater and utility infrastructure. That the infrastructure, the work for stormwater and utilities is at least half of the cost per block. It's about half. if we want to bring our stormwater system up to really today's standards and actually build a system, or currently Carrillo to Coda Street doesn't have any kind of stormwater system underneath the surface. If we want to build a system that connects throughout State Street and that operates in a way that really the city should be operating, especially when we're dealing with significant climate concerns and issues as we see more flooding and rain events. This is a really important piece. And whether we move forward with a master plan or not, from a staff standpoint, I do believe that we should be doing this stormwater infrastructure investment in our downtown. Same with utility infrastructure. And we've had a number of conversations since the draft plan on utility work itself. And talked about, are we moving existing utilities? Are we replacing all utilities in the street itself? In the appendix document, there's a couple reports that will show you just how spread out the utilities are in our street. So you might have one line on one side of the street, another in the middle, another on the other side, and then the next block it's totally different, and you have them in a different location. That's really inconsistent and challenging when it comes to maintenance work, and it means that we're ripping up the street each time Edison or SoCal Gas or water or sewer needs to be upgraded or maintained, rather than keeping it in one sort of more maintained configuration. We call it a utilidor, but one area where you can really confine utility work and not have that occur. It's also important when we're thinking about more housing development in the downtown and looking at capacity for additional 1,000 to 2,000 new housing units. This is what I was mentioning earlier, just the action items matrix. So these are some other things too that are listed in there. Again, there's many others, but bollard infrastructure is one, something that I think could happen fairly early on. Amending zoning to allow for expanded uses downtown, adopting a property maintenance ordinance as examples. A question came up about parking revenue as a potential funding source for plan implementation, and asked to expand on that and what the implications are for DTP. And I recognize this response is not a great response, but honestly, I'm not sure. I am not sure what, it was a thought that if in the future there is a surplus and an opportunity to use some of the funding for downtown improvements, that maybe it's an opportunity. It doesn't mean it is the funding source that we're going to be using. And I also think important to note that if it was a potential funding consideration, we would be having that discussion with you more thoroughly about whether we would want to move in that direction or not. So probably still a little bit early, and something I'd be happy to get comments or feedback on. We can certainly modify the language there. Another question was on CEQA. How locked in is the plan, and what is the potential for it to change in light of CEQA review? We anticipate that more detailed CEQA work will happen during the detailed design and engineering work that we would like to do in the next 12 months. We've had many discussions with our city attorney's office on CEQA and what that process looks like. And, there are some studies that will need to be done to determine how we proceed with CEQA and what kind of resources may exist in the street. At the same time, the street has been changed over the years in many configurations, and we have utility lines that are down 4 to 6 feet below surface. I don't anticipate we're going to go beyond that. So we are not anticipating going into an area that has not already been disturbed. But suffice it to say, this will come during the detailed design and engineering phase. It's not going to, I don't believe it will change the concept that's before you right now of the 30 feet of sidewalk and 20 feet in the middle. I think regardless, that concept is likely going to proceed. It might just be the way in which we do construction that could change. I wanted to highlight, I don't know that I'll read all of this here, but just highlight the council action on April 28th. So we took the draft plan to council, and I think I have a slide in here, but I'll address it now. Council, we had wanted to get the direction from council on whether this is even sort of in the realm of of are we moving in the right approach? And I think, you know, I've done a lot of reflection over this process. It's been less than perfect, to say the least, but we started out, and there's been so much interest in so many different things, and we started out with a conversation on everything, including what does the street furniture look like, and where are we going to have a stage, and where are these other elements that everybody really wants to see and gets excited about are going to be, without really identifying what the space in a basic layout looks like. And so that's where we started to have tension, I believe, when we talked to the community and not being able to get to really get a project to move forward. I also believe the flexible project makes it so as things change in the future, there are opportunities for the street to change without actually having to reconfigure the street. And that is a really important element, because regardless, we are going to have an emergency access area, and probably that will continue in a future state. And so the street use can change, but the street configuration doesn't necessarily have to. We had pretty broad support from council on the draft plan, and there are some questions here that I'm going to ask the Downtown Parking Committee as well in a moment. This was the comment that I had gotten before, and I do understand the concern about Downtown Parking Committee having wanted to see this presentation before other commissions and committees have seen it. The Planning Commission and Historic Landmarks Commission did see it a couple weeks ago. The Transportation Circulation Committee is seeing it later tonight. The Access Advisory Committee is seeing it tomorrow. And it just sort of was the reality of both the direction I was given, as well as just scheduling it and getting things on. But I understand the concern, and I will just say it's never going to be perfect, but you know, the other piece to it is that we are compiling all of the comments from all of the commissions and committees, and that will all be shared with council individually, so they will, or as a packet, but they will be able to see exactly what HLC said and what Downtown Parking said and what Transportation Circulation said, and then as appropriate, we'll be incorporating those comments into the document. And then the question around what level of comments we're looking for at this stage. This is really the opportunity to comment on the plan. So I would say give the comments at the most specificity that you feel that you would like to, with the caveat that we're going to be doing the real detailed design and engineering work at a later stage, and likely back to you when we are talking about where sort of specific elements are going to be located. And what I mean by that is, like, where are the benches within that 4 feet of frontage area, where exactly we may place them. You could still provide comments like that, but really I think what we're hoping to understand is, you know, how comfortable the committee is with the breakout of the overall street layout, and then, you know, what concerns or questions do you want us to address for this plan document, which again is really kind of, it sets the stage for the design. It's the high level visioning and design level document that then construction detailing will come from. And then, so this is the direction that was in the staff report, some of the questions that we are hoping to get the committee's review on: whether the committee supports the design approach for 30-foot sidewalks and a 20-foot travel lane or emergency access area, whether the committee supports the use of retractable bollards, whether the committee supports the civic and commercial district as the highest priority investment area, and then really the last one is, are there other comments or elements that you'd like staff to explore in the master plan before it's finalized? And I will just leave you with this here. I think that is the end of our presentation, but you know, I do believe that the project has a lot of opportunity for downtown, and you know, just sort of reinvestment into a downtown core that is in need of some reinvestment from our community, and I think will only benefit from this type of work. So thank you, and we have Stefanos here as well as Miguel Nunez with Farron Piers to answer any questions that the committee may have.
All right, thank you, Tess. And thank you to the team for being here and presenting this. I'll make a couple quick comments and then we'll go to committee questions. I think the first comment I ever had about this project was on the RFP, and it'll take way longer than what was in the RFP. You mentioned perhaps the process was less than perfect. It's never going to be perfect on a project like this. That's not how planning works. So I want to congratulate the team for getting to this stage in the process. We're a lot closer to the finish line than the start line.
Thank you very much.
And I did have one kind of big picture question about the plan itself, because I was a little confused by this. There's a lot of appendices, but they're not referenced in the document. So it's like, what is the, and when I was like, keyword searching like parking, a lot of the most interesting stuff was in the appendices. So it's like, what is the significance of appendices? What binding effect, what guiding effect do they have for implementation moving forward?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that we will be doing as we go into the final. In truth, we were sort of all pulling things together at the same time, so the appendices are really what the consulting team put together in most instances. So the Moulin Palazoides work is in Appendix A, and Farron Piers has a study in there as well. And then staff really took a lot of the work from the appendices to create the master plan document. But I take your point that we should be referencing it, because a lot of the technical information that people really want to see are in the appendices. Yeah.
Okay, with those few initial comments, I'll go to the committee members we'll do questions, public comment, and then we'll go through the questions asked of us and maybe take a straw poll vote, and then kind of open it up. The last question's open-ended, so kind of other thoughts that you want to give to the project team, we'll do that. So questions, I'll look to my right to start, if there are any questions. Committee Member Cohen.
Thank you so much for the presentation and all your hard work on the plan. It looks really great so far. I do have a question. A few. So my first question is about kind of the comment about needing a flexible design that we can have either open or closed. I'm curious, what are the reasons that one might need private vehicles on this road? So not deliveries, not emergency vehicles, but private vehicles.
I think the most important reason is that from a moment in the evening or night where there's no more people on the street like this, to the point in the morning where people show up, the place is absolutely stone dead. And there's an advantage to having vehicles around to police the place, to have the presence of human beings on the street, to have human activity happen. The number of vehicles at night is, I don't know, what would it be, 5 or 10 an hour, 3 an hour, in that territory, Miguel?
We can, the data we have right now is on a daily basis, and it was provided by the city. We can go back and look and probably quantify and provide an estimate or.
But it's a very low number. You know, a car every 5 minutes. So
Okay.
it's not a matter of circulation as we understand it as being vehicles. You know, it's not that at all between. But it is very important for you actually to, with some friends, go at 3 o'clock in the morning and experience this environment and see, even in its current state, how it feels. And a city should feel safe day and night, I think, 24 hours.
Yes, absolutely. And so if there were no private vehicles on the road, would we still need the bollards every 5 feet if we had a flat and flexible plan?
Yeah, you would, because you would have emergency vehicles,
Okay.
and you would have bicycles as well. You'd have to contain the fast movement of modes other than walking. Otherwise, we have to separate them in some way, right?
Okay, yeah, I thought my understanding was that the kind of the change in the way that I guess the stones on the ground and the kind of architecture of the ground would be a separation, and how those different, the larger stones were more of like a guideway for bicycles, and that would be a separation. But so is that then a requirement that if emergency vehicles are on a road, then it would need bollards for a flat roadway?
Committee Member Cohen, I think it's a mix. So you are correct that the design has a pavement texture and pattern that differentiates the space, and that is done intentionally to limit the space for certain types of users. We've seen a challenge right now just in the street itself, where you can walk in the middle of the street and bike in the middle of the street. And at the time where before we had put lanes out, where it was for everybody, that became a really, really strong conflict. And we had seen in a lot of our engagement the desire for some level of separation of space. So I do believe that having, will it be bollards every 5 feet if it's flat and flexible? Maybe. It would, if it's not that, it would probably still need to be something at a pretty regular basis to divide up that space in the middle that would be geared towards bikes or transit. The other pieces right now we have small shuttles that operate Thursday to Sunday, and while they're great, it would be even better to have shuttles that are operating and can pick up every 10 minutes and are coming at a really regular pace every day of the week. And so, once you start to mix in those kinds of modes as well, the questions around how we differentiate the space enough to make the pedestrian user feel safe at any level, if somebody in a wheelchair, a child that's, running on the street, any of us, there are just questions around how, it probably can't just be a fully flat space that doesn't have some delineator to it.
And the other thing I want to remind you of is that is also not the key reason why the space cannot be flat. It is really the civil engineering question of the water runoff, which is not only a water runoff issue, is also a collateral development issue for the lots on either side and perhaps even behind the frontages on State Street, because none of this can be developed, because currently all the water has to be held within the properties themselves. So it has something to do with housing, that question as well. The possibility of developing housing in the future.
Okay. So you said that the street's completely empty around 3 a.m., so having vehicles would have some kind of a presence. I know that like bars that are open late at night close around 2 a.m. Is that like a state law or a city law?
Committee Member Cohen, do you mean the closure time for bars?
Yeah.
It's a great question. I don't know, but I believe it is a state law.
Okay.
There is, I think, the slides that are in your packet don't have hours of operation in them, and they weren't supposed to be on. That was my error to have them on the screen itself. So, because council had asked us to take those hours out right now, and I think with the intention of having that conversation at a future point, meaning that this design could work sort of regardless of what the hours of operation are. We had it still is the consulting team's recommendation. The hours that we had mentioned, there was a reason that those were the ones that were presented, and with that, we had conversations around what happens to the blocks that see, like the block between Haley and Coda Street, the 500 block, or the 600 block between Coda and Ortega, that have a high number of bars and alcohol and ABC licenses, and are seeing a lot of people in the evening hours up to 2 a.m. And so there's flexibility in the design enough to where from a Thursday to Saturday night, maybe those blocks, if vehicle traffic existed on other blocks of the street, maybe those blocks stay closed until 3 a.m. And we wait, and that is something that we have our public safety staff, has agreed that would make sense, to make sure that we're not starting to engage in sort of that conflict right immediately adjacent to those types of establishments. So I think there's more conversation there as council has the conversation around hours of operation.
And there is also the question of how rapidly the vehicles are moving. I mean, that's a fundamental question. The same way that we're trying to slow down the bicycles, the electric bikes, we're also trying to slow down the vehicles. So I think the texture of the finish on the ground, the limited lanes. I think cars should be going 20 and 25 miles an hour on the street at night, deep at night. So it's not speeding. It's not. You cannot do that. I mean, I guess anybody can do anything, right? But anybody can do anything anywhere. I don't think this is going to be a special place in this respect. People should really be led by the way a lane is designed and operate accordingly. But the impression would be that the speed would be very low, and also low enough to sustain people being on bikes on the streets in the middle of the night as well, however many they are.
Yeah. All right. And then I just had a question about, the thought about making Anacapa, Chapala, Gutierrez, and Haley two-way. I like the overall concept of that. I'm curious that I know previously there were groups advocating to have the 400 block as well closed to vehicle traffic. There were a lot of business owners I know as well who felt left out, that they weren't included in the promenade that was closed to vehicle traffic. If Gutierrez and Haley were two-way, I remember that the reason previously that was stated for why the 400 block couldn't be was because emergency vehicles, especially fire, needed to use the 400 block to get to the waterfront. So if Gutierrez and Haley were two-way, would the 400 block be able to be closed to vehicle traffic as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And just one more question. Have you guys gone into kind of the details? I saw there were like a few benches in the renderings. I'm curious, they didn't have any backs on them, so like no back support. And I'm also curious how many. Is there a reason? Could we do backs on the benches? And how many benches are expected in the plan?
No, there is no reason why there are no backs on the benches, and we don't know what the total number is. I think these are the kinds of questions that we're going to have to address when we begin to work on the design of a place like this, and on every subject.
Okay.
And
Committee
I would like to underline the point that you made before, and we express it in a slightly different way. In order to come to a conclusion about how to change a street like this design-wise for the next 50 years, you cannot possibly start from the benches and the lights and the small-scale issues. You have to start from the big-scale issues, the systemic issues, and then get down to the details, either as part of this process or even more productively afterwards. Because it's so easy to disagree on how many benches you have and whether they have backs or not. But it is imperative that we agree entirely agree on how to use the lanes, how to use the, the overall, all the concept ideas that we talked about today. Those are the important things to agree upon.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
All right, we'll go to Vice Chair Stahl.
Thank you so much for sharing this presentation. It's been really cool to see it develop. So my first question, I'm just curious because this has been an ongoing process. At one point that there's talk of State Street Master Plan, there was still consideration of significant housing development in Paseo Nuevo. In recent weeks, it's been shifting to office space use with Yardi. I'm curious if that's in any way impacted, changed either one of yours kind of perspective on how some of these things might shape the civic district versus, where that we wouldn't have a residential district downtown. So has that shift with Yardi impacted this at all in ways that isn't reflected in the slides since that's so recent?
Committee Member Stahl, no, actually. So the 1,000 to 2,000 units, I think, is relatively conservative. We have looked at, outside of the consulting team, we've looked at just different properties downtown and the potential for redevelopment and where potential projects could be located. There are many within the civic and commercial district that we do feel like at some point, if there was the desire from the private property owner, could be converted into housing. And if, thinking about some of the larger buildings in that area, yes, there's the Paseo Nuevo buildings. There's also the Balboa building right near there. There's the building that is, I believe it's 810 State Street, currently or formerly Logic Monitor. It's a pretty large building there, and a couple others in that space. There's also some look at the immediately adjacent blocks, Chapala, Anacapa, and a couple past. I do think that there's opportunity for us to still get at the 1,000 to 2,000 units in the core in the full plan area. I think to do that, we need to look pretty seriously at some of our permitting regulations and look at how we are addressing density and how we are addressing sort of height overall and where things where there might be some more leniency or latitude for housing development in the downtown core.
Thank you. And to follow up with that, if the goal of allowing private vehicles at night is kind of to have eyes on the street, is that something that would then potentially be modified with mixed use or with more residential and people living there at night that would kind of adapt that use at night?
No, not really, because most people are asleep at 1 o'clock in the morning. I think the issue of cars or no cars is I think the issue of cars or no cars and the way a flex scheme accommodates that kind of mix is really mostly a 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. issue. I mean, that's where that issue is critical, because that's where 99.9% of all life happens in the street.
Okay, I'm going to go to Committee Member Labrie. He also let me know that he has to leave at 9:30, so I'm going to allow questions from Committee Member Labrie and then some very brief comments, and then we'll get back to the plan we had in place.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and project team, and Ms. Harris, thank you so much. There's so much to this plan, and as you noted, there is it's a small piece of even bigger kind of question. So, but here are my quick questions, and I'll own that I was the one that got a little snippy about not seeing this earlier, but it's because our jurisdiction is parking. Anything is specifically parking, we want to be able to comment on, and so and it's our job to stay in our lane, and staff and our chair can help keep us in our lane. But to parking, you seem to allude to maybe I'm interpreting a restriping or repurposing of some of the on-street parking on the zero blocks on either side of the spine.
Some,
Could you speak
yes.
to that a little bit more?
Well, I think that there's obviously a need to service the blocks, right, during the day, and perhaps during the night as well, but during the day primarily. People being dropped off, all the deliveries, all the kinds of things that happen. And I think at the appropriate moment, maybe Miguel, you can also talk a little bit about these dimensions if you wish. At the appropriate moment, we need to decide how much of that sidewalk, 50 feet, 70 feet, 100 feet, whatever that number is, adjacent to State Street on all four sides and every intersection, can be dedicated to service activities. Probably, maybe on a flex basis as well. Maybe different for different times of the day. I think that's a really important subject, and I do believe that the great advantage, the single reason why we're discussing a scheme like this, and I think I should say this clearly, is that when people privilege pedestrians over other vehicles in kinds of vehicles in urban environments in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they did so without providing adequate parking in these downtowns, and 90% of them failed. But we have the privilege of having we have 4,000 parking spaces, and we probably need more. There's 2 or 3 places, clearly, there could be more parking built in this project, particularly closer to 101. Maybe parking that maybe services both sides, the zones, the Funk Zone and the waterfront, and State Street to the north. I think that is the single reason why we can discuss a project like this, because of the work your committee and the city has done over the last 50 years.
Great, thank you. And if I can just understand the plan a little bit better, the on State Street stormwater issues, is that more about stormwater runoff and evacuation, or retention and percolation? The design, is it trying to improve both? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Committee Member Labrie, yes. So the idea would be a gravel pit underneath the street. So percolating and retention to a large degree. But there are areas where we would also want to be taking off excess flow.
I think it would do both.
Yeah.
It would do both because the volume of water is such, they'll have to sheet flow and be retained.
So our below-grade garages are well-built, and this is more just a side note for the project, not a reason to not do the retention basin, but of everywhere in Santa Barbara, State Street has basements, and they were all built a long time ago, and so you will have flooding issues their property owners will have, below-grade flooding issues to contend with if there's much water introduced to the ground. So just something out there to be thoughtful of. So just a couple of quick comments, and thank you, committee, and Mr. Chair, for allowing me to make some comments. As far as parking goes, the plan to me doesn't hurt our parking system. It provides better access, and I would just encourage the plan to continue to think about the space between the project area as it's currently defined and the parking resources. So Paseos and the immediate side street areas, those are access to the parking. And, by limiting vehicle access to State Street, it just creates access issues for people who typically would be dropped off. And I would, suggest that those who need to be dropped off closer to their destination are going to struggle with not having access. That's been a problem while State Street's been closed. So the more we can be thoughtful about and maybe expand or include in the plan better Paseo improvements, better access to the parking resources, I think the project will be that much more successful. kind of along those lines, I too am very curious about looking at a downtown master plan and how this fits in to both vehicular circulation as well as a greater interest and emphasis on a Paseo master plan. It's like the unfinished sidewalks around town. The Paseo system is incomplete. And so I just put a plug in for, as council considers, how to move forward into the engineering phase of this, that we give some thought to how can we improve the Paseo plan, how can we kind of set it up for, to partner with property developers to help connect the Paseos and improve the Paseos. And along that, this is a question for the project, one of the biggest problems downtown, in my view, is trash, is refuse collection and access. State Street has been kind of not a significant piece of the access to that, but Paseos, trash collection, trash is an issue downtown, especially for, all those buildings that front on State that have to travel from their front door around, down and out to the trash. So just another thought on that. And then this is also not a strictly parking question or comment, but I would love to see how the how the design differs per district. But that's not a parking issue, so I'm not going to ask.
And we didn't have much time to really do that. I mean, we alluded to it, but it has
Yeah.
not been illustrated clearly.
So that is the extent of my questions, and I have just one concern I want to voice, and that's just an interim plan. And, I know, Ms. Harris, there's big questions about funding and all of that. That will have a big impact on when these improvements start. But I would just advocate for an interim plan that provides more vehicular access, especially to blocks that are particularly quiet, we'll say, at this point. The current plan has been in place for a long time, and especially if we're moving towards a more blended and flexible use, let's start getting flexible now, which maybe, to your point, the bollards installation could help to make that better, because there are businesses that need help, properties that need help and access now. So I would advocate for that. But again, thank you very much for the presentation.
And Committee Member Labrie, and to all the committee members, just in response to the last comment, there is, separate from the master plan, there is a conversation happening at City Council on Tuesday next week, June 30th, that will be talking about the interim plan for State Street, meaning what the street configuration will look like between now and the implementation of the master plan. So I just wanted to make the committee aware of that.
And thanks for that, Ms. Harris, but I had one comment I forgot. There is a distinct difference between commuter bicycle traffic and those who are kind of tootling around downtown, accessing different shops and so on. And this is to the city too, I hope we study the circulation of all of downtown. And to think of bikes as two different groups, I think would be smart. And to help alleviate the problem of people traveling really fast on their bikes down State Street, providing good, commuter circulation for bikes that is off of the State Street corridor, I think would be wise to seriously consider. So as the plan thinks about bike traffic up and down State, I think it would be helpful if you didn't have the burden of having to accommodate commuter traffic as the sole resource for getting up and down downtown.
Well, your comments are extremely useful and very insightful. I would say that one of the reasons for thinking about the two-way system on the adjacent streets is possibly to have some of the speedy bicycle traffic on those streets, or one of them anyway. I mean, particularly in Chapala, there's an enormous amount of width that would accommodate such thing. It's been a very difficult thing for the design team to be working on a downtown project that's so severely delimited. Because I would say that the adjacent street issues and the issues of housing are completely integral to this project. I mean, you cannot really solve this intelligently without addressing these questions. And we are struggling because the comments are coming in towards us. We are addressing comments out, but there is no point of possible resolution at this point. That's why there are recommendations for studying the network, for studying the housing. And there might be things that come out of that in some way affect particularly the operations of a flex system. I think that's what's going to happen. That's why a flex system is so important. It can take care of eventualities that happen in the future that we don't know about.
Great. Thank you again. And to the committee, I thank you for allowing me to ask those questions and make those comments.
All right, thank you, Committee Member Labrie. Do we have other questions now? Back to just questions from committee members. I have a couple, and then we'll go to public comment. In one of the appendices, there's mention of we should have 2 hours of free parking. What's that based off of?
The committee members, so I believe that was there's a economic or retail report that I believe is where that comment had come from. That's one we would need to study a bit further. I think that was from the sub-consultant's experience in other districts throughout the country and just wanting to bring more people for a longer period of time. But I think we would need to explore that before implementing something like that.
Okay, and then when I looked at like the parking language in the plan, a lot of it goes straight then to housing, the housing conversation. I know that's like a huge topic, but it's in the plan. The feasibility study for housing units and city parking lots, as a kind of interim step, there's no anticipated cost, and it's not clear to me, like, is that going to happen? What does that look like? Because it's not clear to me in the document.
Yes, Chair Newkirk, thank you for that question. So I think it's a good point that there isn't a cost associated with it yet in the draft. I think that is something we can at least do a high-level estimate on before we finalize the document. I do think there's been enough conversation within the city administrator's office for moving that type of project forward and looking at city-owned property, including surface-level parking lots for housing development. So in a parking lot stance, it would likely be podium build, so you maintain the parking. But that is something I think, over the next year, you could anticipate seeing some more staff work on that particular project.
And then I think maybe my last question is about, it's come up during the budget conversation, it's in the plan here, and I'm sure it's in the housing element too, about streamlining processes. Is anyone going to give like actual concrete proposals? Because I think everyone's in favor of streamlining until you actually get rid of a public hearing or something. So like, is anyone going to actually say like, here's what we should do to actually facilitate these? Not even just the housing, but like the other implementation projects. Are we gonna, it seemed like the only detail about that short-term implementation for zoning was like accessory use flexibility within the weird tenant spaces. That seemed the only detail I saw.
Yes, Chair Newkirk, you hit a point that I think is certainly valid, and there's a couple different, there are things happening at the same time, and the timing alignment is has not been such where we were able to share more in this document yet. There is a group within the city that is working on sort of incentives for development downtown and what that could look like, meaning what are things that a developer could do that the city would benefit from, and in exchange, what are things that the city could do outside of our normal municipal code that would allow for housing development more quickly. So that will be coming before council and the planning commission, I believe, in August for a joint discussion and session. It's going to be right around the time as the plan gets adopted, so I don't think we'll see that conversation in the plan itself just because of the timing there. But that is happening. We have sort of retooled the development liaison position that the city has to really try and get at sort of watching and connecting with applicants as commercial projects and some larger scale housing projects come through the process. And that's still a very new position, and we're working through exactly what that entails. But I've already seen that be pretty successful in moving projects forward faster than what has traditionally been done. So I think there's more work to be done. As part of the action plan, one of the things that was in there was the suggestion of adding essentially a full department around economic development. And I could envision that development liaison position could expand into not just one, but maybe there's 2 or 3 different people that are really dedicated within the city to help move the process, move the permitting process, or an applicant through the process more smoothly.
Okay. Any other questions before we go to public comment? Committee Member Cohen?
Just a quick follow-up to one of Chair Newkirk's questions about building housing over a surface lot. Would building podium housing over a surface lot limit the number of units that would be able to be built there versus just building on ground
Committee
floor?
Member Cohen, I think it would be a conversation we would want to have on whether we would want to remove parking. So if we removed the lot entirely, then you could have more housing in that site, almost definitely. If you want to maintain that parking, then there are some trade-offs there, and that might limit sort of the number of units that could be achieved in the lot. I think the first thing, though, would be really for us to get a handle on if we were to do a project where you still had parking included, how many units could we get in that space, and understand what that number is, and then see the differential from there.
This is a very, very fine question and a very difficult one to answer, because there's both a question of whether you want to get rid of public uses on pieces of land that are centrally located enough to play 100, 200, 300-year role in the development of a downtown. That's one question. The other one is whether you can afford to go 2 levels down and maintain the public use of parking while having parking for housing. And the third question is, how does parking for housing and parking for non-housing get accommodated on one side? In other words, what's a shared parking strategy that makes both happen on one level, for instance? It's a very difficult but very interesting question. And it probably demands a very serious study, a separate study on that subject, as does the entire housing question, because the issue of height, of area of land necessary to have a seriously dense piece of housing and so on, all those are major, major questions. And there has to be a code that's an enabling. Our codes are very defensive in this country, and we need an enabling code to make the housing possible, right? A form-based code as opposed to a use-based code, for example.
Thank you.
Committee Member Evers?
So I'm curious whether so the 10 a.m. to or the 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. block that we are talking about for the flex corridor seems to be like something the public has like been very or has a lot of opinions about. We all agree that State Street needs a revitalization and like the Civic area needs a lot of work. But you mentioned to committee member Cohen that at 3 a.m. we want to have basically people on the road to keep it safe and feeling like, you know, there's people on watch. But what about like that 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. time? I feel like that's kind of a central point to your argument about keeping or for that block, for business owners, for access to the downtown area, and for circulation. So I'm just curious if you have any information on that specific time frame within that block.
Well, we haven't looked at that specifically. Maybe Miguel, you can talk some about the volume of vehicles at that time. But you know, there are major questions. There are major questions of construction. There are major questions of service. There are major questions of garbage. There are issues really that need to be very, very carefully looked at. We know they exist, and that's why the flex scheme has validity as a point of departure. But the specifics, I think, the exact timing, is not clear. And the other thing that's not clear is whether the only way for us to find out is to start, right, and establish it by experience, as opposed to by some imagined ideal number. It doesn't exist. It might vary by city. It might vary by city, meaning both the culture of the city and the size of the city, perhaps, and other issues like that, right? Visitors versus local people. The balance in cities in that respect. So, Miguel, do you have any thoughts? Yeah, and you can speak here if you can.
That's a good question, Commissioner Ever. Thank you for the opportunity to respond. I think it would be a similar concept to what was said about 3 a.m., the difference being that from 6 to 10 is a time when activity is increasing, right? The peak hour commute period is typically considered to be between 7 and 9 a.m. So what the 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. period what you might see there is that vehicle activity would increase, therefore providing a little bit more eyes on the street, as well as being able to accommodate some of the peak hour travel that occurs during that time frame.
And if I can add, I apologize, to Committee Member Evers, based on our experience over the past 6 years that we've had the promenade, as well as prior to that, when stopping and loading was very limited to, in fact, those hours before 10 a.m. on State Street at that point, although many people did it illegally. The sort of 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. hours are really our peak hours for service vehicles and for delivery vehicles. That's when we see, it's when, you know, the DSBIA janitorial staff comes out and they do all their cleaning. So they've got, you know, their pressure washing vehicles and their trucks and things like that. We try to get our work as the city when we have to do maintenance out there done in those morning hours because the volume is lower and that's when it's open. And it's also when you see the bulk of the deliveries coming into the businesses. And so those hours are really key. We've maintained service vehicle access during those hours, you know, throughout the entirety of the promenade, and again, even prior when we just had regular vehicle traffic. And that's something that we would need to maintain in order to continue to serve those businesses and make sure we can keep the street operating. So.
Other questions? All right, let's go. Do we have any public comment?
We have no speakers.
So back to the committee, maybe if we get up the slide on the questions being asked of us, I think we might spend up more time on the last question. But maybe we can do a little straw poll. I'll go question by question, do a straw poll, so kind of get a temperature read, and then if anyone wants to add specific comments to that question or why they support or don't support, we'll do that. And then we'll have an opportunity for everyone to kind of opine more broadly. So with that, kind of just, we'll do like a hand raise eye. Do you support the design approach for 30-foot sidewalks and a 20-foot travel lane emergency access? Those support, yes. And that's 5-0. Does anyone have any specific comments they would like to provide on that question? Seeing none, we'll go to the next question. Do you support the use of retractable bollards? Those in support, say yes, yes. Seeing 5-0. Any comments on that topic? Committee Member Cohen.
I just want to comment on the shape of the bollards being concave. I do think it's more important. We already have loading zones, like 3-minute for personal vehicles and 30-minute for commercial loading zones on all of the cross streets. And I think that works a lot better than having people pull into State Street itself. I think it's a lot more important to have shorter crossing distances for pedestrians at each intersection.
Committee Member Cohen, if you don't mind me asking, the slide that was presented, is that, does that help with that concern, this sort of configuration rather than the concave approach?
On average, about 6. On average, a vehicle is about 6.5 to 7 feet wide. That's for a smaller vehicle. Some larger SUVs and trucks, which are pretty common these days, do get wider, but the minimum width is typically 6.5 feet, and they've been designed to be spaced at 5 feet or 5.5 to prevent large vehicles, to potentially allow the transit vehicle that's being used, and also to allow the bicycles to proceed.
But, so a car would be able to pull in there sideways for a second to drop someone off if they wanted to.
Are you talking about the intersection now?
Yeah, so I'm imagining a car going down like this street and then being like, oh, I have to drop someone off.
No, there is no space for that to happen
No?
there. No.
Okay.
Yeah, then I guess that would be fine. Yeah, I wouldn't want anyone blocking the way for bicyclists to get through. So.
And I'll just add one comment. I think it's not really about the retractable. I think it's about the permanent, and it's a downstream design issue. But I think those will have to be really carefully designed because people are going to trip on those. People are going to fall over. So I think that'll have to be strategically designed so that people will see them, because plenty of people are on their phones, not paying attention, walking along, and I imagine the city would be on the hook for injuries. Any other?
Yeah, I have a comment in the similar vein. Like, do those have to be bollards? It seems like, I mean, right now we're currently using large planters, right? And those are pretty, they're hard to trip over because they're in your face. And do we need the bollards on the sidewalk? Like, is it not an obvious thing? You're not supposed to drive on the sidewalk? Is this an issue we've seen other places?
That doesn't seem to be obvious to some people who've done enormous damage
Totally.
in our country
I'm not a
recently.
professional in this, I'm just-
So we don't need to go any further on that question. I mean, this is really a design question, purely, and we should really return to it. And one we're very sensitive to. We don't love the idea of bollards. There'll come a moment, I think, that we can talk about that. I appreciate the sensitivity, though.
I think Committee Member Evers, the one thing that the bollards here do that other things can't is they provide access if needed. So from an emergency vehicle standpoint, it's just much easier to get through. Or if we ever were to bring back larger scale transit on State Street, you could do that with a retractable bollard. You probably couldn't do that if we maintained the planner configuration. But sort of depending on those pieces, yes, you theoretically could have another element. We felt, at least for the retractable piece, we felt that was really the only option that gave us the flexibility that we were hoping to get out of this street. I think there's more possibility with the fixed bollards, and maybe they don't look like bollards. Maybe they look like planters or seating, or there's lots of examples in many other communities of large concrete. They have to be crash proof, but large, concrete elements that are really used as this extra element of seating, but are actually there from a safety standpoint. So I think we could look more at those ones.
What the circle represents is actually a planter with seating on it, a round banco in that location, in that way. I mean, it's an indication that there has to be some way to frustrate the possibility of somebody driving through. At the same time, between the edge of that circle and the corner of the building, there is about 15 to 18 feet. That varies. Sometimes there's 20. So to have 2 or 3, fixed bollards is not unusual. And when the time comes, I think we have to show the kinds of bollards, the spacing, and look at dozens of examples, and perhaps even build them someplace so we can appreciate what 2 bollards between here and there would look like, and whether they would be a problem or not be a problem, visually and functionally.
Committee Member Pratt.
It's a very specific question, but I know in some of the maps it shows the 1300 block as part of the downtown, but then it kind of mentions 1200. Are there thoughts of putting bollards on the 1300 block? Obviously, I have a
Committee Member Pratt, yes, there have been thoughts about it. So there is more discussion to be had there. I think if we were to do the 1300 block, it would likely be the last block that would get bollards. So we, in terms of prioritization, that one is not going to be prioritized for bollards. There still are other improvements that would happen on that block. But, even in the grant proposal that we just submitted, we were proposing that there would be bollards that would be at Sola Street and State Street that would allow for activities that would happen. We likely aren't going to put any bollards at Arlington Way and State Street, and instead, with the thought that it would be times like the film festival or other large-scale events where we might close off the area and use the retractable bollards, or a parade or something like that. And on Arlington Way, there's limited traffic, and we think we could just use a general barricade there and not put the investment in that specific location. But yes, it is a consideration.
Other bollard comments? All right. So we'll go to the next question is, do you support the Civic and Commercial District as the highest priority investment area? And maybe just staff briefly the ration, or like this, why that's the suggestion?
Yes, thank you, Chair Newkirk. This is a question I sort of grappled with how to actually ask this question, if I'm being perfectly honest. I mean, one of the things is I would like to get clarity from the community and the different committees and commissions on where the largest transformation should occur. As staff, we believe the largest transformation should occur in this district because it has the most potential for redevelopment, and it's had the most challenges operating as and it's right in the center. It's right at Paseo Nuevo City Hall, El Paseo. There's many sort of landmarks right in that immediate vicinity, and it connects what you can see today as being the areas that are certainly more vibrant, the 2 restaurant cores. I think there's much more capacity for a retail strategy, particularly in the Civic and Commercial District. Going back to it, I think the question really is, if we were to only be able to invest in a certain area for a set period of time, and hopefully we would be able to do all of it, but would we prioritize this area, or would you suggest another area? And similarly, outside of the design itself, but if we were to do programming, meaning both activities in the street as well as policies or other types of programs like loan programs or other things trying to drive investment, do we concentrate it in this location or in other locations on State Street?
All right, so with that, we'll ask the question, then folks can opine, but do you support the Civic and Commercial District as the highest priority investment area? Those that are, say yes. Yeah. Yes, seeing 5. And then are there any, so 5-0 again, any comments on this question? Okay, now we're to the open-ended. And we can go past 10, but I don't know if anyone needs to leave. If not, I'll look to my left this time. If there's any comments, seeing none, we'll start at the right. Are there additional comments? Committee Member Cohen.
So I'm really supportive of two-way streets on Anacapa and Chapala, especially with separated bike infrastructure. I do think it's important that we have we have alternatives to just State Street for bicycles. I mean, for the high-speed bicycle traffic for sure, and also, I mean, even during the farmers market, it's impossible to bike through there, and it's so unsafe to go on Chapala or Anacapa, and also just a lot more difficult since they're one way. Yeah, I think the two-way traffic on Chapala, Anacapa, and also on Gutierrez and Haley, I think are really important to include in the plan. And let's see. I don't see to me, there is no compelling reason to allow vehicle traffic at all, private vehicle traffic at all on the street. It kind of just feels like a compromise for the sake of compromise, which does compromise some valuable design aspects. I don't believe that people driving in vehicles can act effectively as eyes on the street. I think pedestrians and bicyclists are a lot more effective as eyes on the street rather than people in their protected little boxes that are driving at higher speeds. Yeah, I mean, I also support at least the 1,000 to 2,000 extra units of housing, but I mean, I think we need more downtown. And with more housing downtown, I do see, there will be more pedestrians, there will be more bicyclists. It is I mean, as previously said, it is one of the most, the highest volumes of bikes on a street in probably the country. And having more people living on there will definitely encourage more biking and reduce the need for vehicle access in a lot of these areas. And yeah, I also just worry about nighttime vehicle traffic on the street as it being a DUI hotspot. And I also feel like, from my experience, a lot of vehicles that are driving at 3 a.m. are the kinds of vehicles that are blasting music, adding a little bit of noise pollution, which, or revving engines really loudly, which will affect the extra housing that's going to be built there and the people living there. And I just, especially on a street like State Street that doesn't really have any other purpose to drive on than cruising. So, yeah, I don't think that there's any compelling reason to allow private vehicles on the street.
Committee Member Stahl.
So, yeah, thanks again for this presentation. It's been really great to watch everything evolve. One thing potentially parking related that I want to say again that I've mentioned at previous meetings, I think in terms of creating State Street as an accessible space, part of that, the tree canopy already for cooling, I think is very important, but also public restrooms. And I think maybe that's something where, because looking at this map, there's no public restrooms below Ortega, which I think is a problem if we want to, for accessibility reasons. And maybe some of these parking structures would be the place that the city owns that has services. That's something that could be considered when there are renovations happening at existing city lots. If maybe sections could be, turn a few stalls into a public restroom, I think would be a valuable addition to creating a comfortable third space where people want to spend time and not feel like they're forced to engage in commercial activity in order to use facilities. But yeah, I love the plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Committee Member Evers.
Yeah, I just want to also kind of add on to what Committee Member Cohen said. So I totally resonate with her on the 3 a.m., like what is the use of the cars? And I think you respond to that properly with there's going to have to be a detailed research and when this does need to be opened and closed. But I do think the retractable bollards do have ample value for those business owners. And as Miguel mentioned, that peak commute time from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., I think those business owners do have a good right to be able to access the front of their buildings and use the front of their facility that they are renting or owning and doing business out of. And so that is, I think, a very good argument to present to the public for the reasoning behind having those open hours for State Street. Yeah.
And I'll add a few comments. I think it is wise in this plan to be general, otherwise we'll never get it done. I think that resonates with me as a long-range planner. I think it does bring concern to me. I mean, I think it's the right approach, but I have concerns. I'm the one that brought up CEQA because CEQA is a litigation tool, and kicking the can on some of the CEQA work means maybe we'll get a project designed later and then it'll get litigated and we'll get stuck. I also have process concerns. Even mentioning, City Council and Planning Commission are going to have a joint meeting about streamlining. Well, HLC is the approval body for development downtown. So, there's this logical disconnect in our process that is so obvious to me. And I'll be more specific about that in a minute. But I have, real concerns about, we need to get stuff done once this plan gets adopted. And I have worries that there's going to be procedural hurdles down the road the way we're set up. I'm not sure about some of the recommendations in the appendices and how they'll be leveraged or tooled in the future. Like the 2-hour free parking thing, someone's going to latch on to that. And from our perspective, we have financing concerns, revenue generation issues. And so I feel like someone's going to use that later. So that makes me nervous that it would end up in an adopted plan. The reference to the funding from parking revenues seems a little pie in the sky. I'd love for that to be a conversation again someday. We had those conversations, 6 years ago maybe. We were funding additional things downtown, but that feels like pretty far in the rearview mirror at this point. But getting back particularly to the housing question, I'm totally supportive of using the surface lots or kind of engaging. Surface lots are so inefficient in a place where property values are so high. It's just a terrible use of space. And I think that's certainly a conversation we should be having, and any studies that need to be done should be done. I'm not sure that how much we need to study it, but I'm all for that. I think no one wants to talk about streamlining. I'm not sure that having liaisons to usher people through the process is enough. That seems like a half measure. I think we have to be actually serious about what our processes are and how we change them. I think that should be called out in the plan. I have 2 suggestions. One would be 2 charter amendments to repeal section 817C of the charter, which gives HLC the decision authority over projects in the El Pueblo Viejo Landmark District. I think we should not be taking projects, especially civic projects, that have already been blessed in a plan through a body that is focused on historic preservation. I don't think that's right. I think Planning Commission or City Council is the appropriate place for those conversations to be had. I think if we're prioritizing housing downtown and we're saying housing should not have to go through a Historic Landmarks Commission. That is a logical disconnect. If Planning Commission and City Council sets the rules, they should be applying the rules. The second charter amendment would be repeal of section 1506, which is the 60-foot height standard in the city. To Committee Member Cohen's point, what would it do to the number of housing if we're going to put parking below the housing units? Well, at 60 feet, you're going to run out of area pretty, and that's not to say we shouldn't have a height standard, but having to go to being locked in a charter where there's no flexibility, I don't think makes sense when we're talking 1,000 to 2,000 more units, and we're not producing units. I looked at the 2025 APR, Annual Progress Report, which tracks housing. The city's doing a terrible job getting housing built. It just is. Like in 2025, the majority of the housing units were ADUs. That's state law driven, and that's in your residential districts anyways. In terms of multifamily, I think it was 101 units. And, you know, the RENA number's 8,000, so on a per year, we're talking, we should be seeing 1,000 units, and we saw less than 200 in 2025. So I think it's time to be serious about that. And so those are two recommendations I think should be put in the plan. I'm sure they won't be, but I think they should be. And I think that is my comments. Again, I want to recognize all the work that's been put into this. Has been, I think, a herding cats exercise. And I think kind of the way the plan's designed now to leave those specifics to later is really smart, and probably the only way that this thing will get to the finish line. And then I think the work is really getting that grant funding, finding the grant money. I have some concerns also about, I think, the local financing and maybe specifically allocating local revenue to the State Street, potentially at the cost of other parts of the community. I think maybe, you know, so I think finding those state and hopefully federal funds are going to be really important. Does anyone else have any final comments? All right, again, thank you so much for taking the time and
Thank you
Tess
very
for this
much.
work. All right, I gotta get the agenda. I think that's it, right? That concludes item 2, and with that, we are adjourned.